And let's add a couple lights to give our level a little more interesting feel. And maybe we'll lighten the hallway a little more and darken the area, or vice versa. All right. So with our entity tool, we'll change our object class from player terrorists to light. And you'll notice that instead of selecting from a huge list and scrolling down, we can simply start typing light, L-I, and it'll fill in the rest, G-H-T, underscore. And you'll see within the box, within our lights, we have a standard light, light dynamic, light environment, and a light spot. The standard light entity we can place throughout our level to create a glow emanating from that spot to illuminate different sections and portions of our map. A dynamic light, unlike a fixed static light entity, can actually move and follow objects we pointed at throughout the level. A standard light entity is compiled in the RAD process and takes basically no resources for the game to compute once we're playing. A dynamic light is computed during gameplay, and so is very stressful to our computer while we're playing the game, but also has some really good results. Generally, in a multiplayer game, dynamic lights are not used simply because players are more likely to sacrifice some aesthetics than lag during gameplay. Light environments light a world based on an artificial sun created with a skybox, which we'll go over in a later chapter. Light spot are just like what they sound. It's a spotlight emanated from a certain point that creates a cone of light aimed at a target that we can identify. So first, let's just add a typical ambient light. Then our 3D view, we'll add the light midway up the wall on our counter-terrorist side of the map. We can check where it is, the selection tool. We're right up against that wall, a little more than halfway up. Now Alt-Enter to bring up the properties dialog, and let's look at some basic info. Our class name is light, which we've already selected. Gives us a little light bulb as an entity inside the 3D view. And the first key value is name. Now all entities can be named, and in order to add more functionality, which we'll discuss in a later section, you'll need to give certain entities names. So for now, since we're not going to turn on or off or add any other functionality to our light, we don't need to give it a name, but we could simply call it light. Apply. The brightness key value is simply the color that our light is going to emanate. Pick color. White is good, but kind of boring. Could give us kind of an orange glow. Maybe tone it down a bit more toward the white. Just a soft orange. Hit OK. If we hit apply, that color will actually be reflected within the 3D view of our little light bulb. Now HDR has a high dynamic range lighting, which we'll discuss more later. For now, we'll just use the standard brightness key value. Appearance. We have several different appearances which we can pick from. We can have our light flicker or strobe or pulse. Let's just keep it normal. Get a nice subtle glow out of here. There's also some custom patterns that we can set. Lights can be computed in different ways. We have a constant light, which will come out with a constant value, however far our light projects. Right now we're set to 0, which means false or not on, 1 being true or on. Linear is a linear progression of light out from the source, kind of a simple fall off with values decreasing as we get further away. And quadratic, which is a 1 or true, in our standard lighting. The fall off for a quadratic light is exponential and creates a much softer, more diffused fall off to our light and is generally preferred. You can choose the fall off distance. We can point our light at an entity, which is far more useful for spotlights. And we can choose the maximum distance that the light is allowed to cast, 0 being a default value. We'll leave it for the default, although we could add a numerical value in number of units. 0. Let's check out some of the other tabs in the object properties for our light. We have outputs and inputs, which we'll go over in the next section. Add functionality to our light. There's flags, which set characteristics for our light. We can set it to be initially dark, although we currently have no way to turn it on. Let's keep that unselected so our light shows up when we run our map. And we can select which viz group this light is a part of. As you build more complex maps, it'll be a good idea to create a light or even type of light viz group so we can easily turn on or off different lights within your level. Okay, apply and close our dialog box. Let's go to our top view and we'll shift to clone, shift drag to clone our light. And I forgot to hold shift as I released, so I'm just going to undo a couple times. Make sure I get my light back where it started. Undo, undo, undo. There it is. And remember, I can actually start dragging without the shift key, but if I press the shift key as I let go of my mouse button, I will have successfully cloned the light. We'll zoom in over here, put it against the wall, check in our 3D view. There it is. We could change any parameter now, make it a different color, adjust the scale, the fall off, etc. Let's just leave it and see how we like it. Let's put at least one, maybe two spotlights within our hallway. Entity tool. We'll change from a light to a light underscore spot. Enter to select. Let's just place one, two spotlights within our level. We'll control click to select both of those. Go to our front or our side view in the center hallway. We'll drag those lights up the top of our hallway. Now the lights are not fixtures themselves. If we were to play the game now, we would see the point where a light originates. We would not see any instrument or light bulb, as it were, that seems to be the source. Those we'll set separately as prop entities in a moment. Now, the cones, or helper objects, which we're seeing for our lights and show us where our lights will actually be projected, can be turned on or off from within the View menu by checking or unchecking Show Helpers. We're going to leave them on so we can get a better feel for how our lights will be displayed within the game. Control click both lights, Alt Enter to bring up our Object Properties panel. And let's just name our lights Light Spot. Let's change from this kind of boring white to something a little more exciting, maybe kind of a darker blue. Now, if we went really dark blue, we'd get really dark lights that would actually kind of paint blue onto our textures. We want it to actually feel like light, so let's do something that appears here to be a little lighter blue, but will actually give us a pretty dark blue inside the game. Okay, apply. You'll see our cones turn to our shade of blue. Let's narrow the focus of our cone a little bit to not quite flood the hallway, but be a little more angular and just kind of drop down the sides of our walls. We'll leave our light at quadratic so we get a nice gradient fall off, 1 meaning that's on. We'll change our inner bright angle, which is this inner cone here, to something more along the lines of 15 degrees. See those things instantly shrink up. Let's change the outer angle, the fall off angle, to something far less, maybe 20 or 25. They still hit in here, so maybe even a little less here. We'll just call it 20. Boom. Alright. Look out. Yeah, we got these nice cones kind of right on the circles of our tile in the middle of the hallway. And as I said, we'll have light coming from these sources, but really nothing that looks like it's actually giving off that light. So let's change back to our entity tool. Go into our entities. We're going to change to a general type of entity that we'll use for many different objects within our levels. A prop static. Now if you look in the drop-down box, you'll see there are several different types of prop entities. We have prop detail entities, basically very easy entities for the engine to render. We can have tens of thousands of them. Generally we're not placing detail entities ourselves, they're part of textures and such. We have dynamic props, which can be animated, broken apart, generally used very sparingly in multiplayer levels where we want lower pings and less lag, rather than prettier or more dynamic levels. We have physics props, which are objects such as boxes and canisters, which can be pushed around and picked up. And we have some overrides and other variations of those, which we'll get more into when we get to our functionality, and are a little more appropriate to single-player games such as Half-Life 2. Ragdoll props are like our dynamic props. They can be animated, but they also have their own skeletal systems, but they can flop all over the place like custom objects. A good example is the cardboard box within Half-Life 2, which can be shot and kind of unfolds and drapes over other prop objects. Right now we're going to be dealing with static props that we can place very easily, select from a range of different models available for us within Counter-Strike, Half-Life, other Source games. Really are objects within our world that maybe we can't create with brush geometry, or at least not very easily. So let's go ahead and place a prop static, which by default is this little red cube. I'll enter, bring up its property page, and we'll go down to the world model in our class info, which is perhaps the most important when dealing with props. The world model will actually allow us to choose a model that is our prop. After you click Browse, we get a list of folders which we can browse through that include the various props included within your Source games. We go to City 17, Prop C17, and we have the option to filter, much like we did in our textures. Let's type light, and we get a bunch of different lights that we can browse in the model browser. Not really looking for traffic lights, desk lights. Something like this could work, kind of industrial big ball light. Floodlights, it's kind of dome light for your ceiling. These work pretty well, these cage lights. Let's choose cage light 2 on. Nice white light, which we can pretend is blue. Click OK and apply. If you move this out of the way, you'll see our little red cube has turned into this nice light fixture. We'll close this. And we're just going to place our static prop light fixture right around our light emitting entity. Find it in our hallway. Selection tool. And we'll move this guy just to hang on our ceiling. Scroll down our grid so we don't have our prop in the middle of world geometry. We don't want it to overlap. Get it right up there towards the ceiling. Yeah. We can see we have a prop entity, which is our model of our light, and our emitting light entity, which will actually emit the light from itself. We don't really want this thing just kind of hanging out in the middle of nowhere, so let's Alt-Enter. We'll rotate it so the little end is facing the wall. There we go. 270. Close this, and we'll drag him back against the wall. We could actually grab our spot and put it right there as well. Now we want to be careful. Either of our entities is not actually intersecting our geometry, which it is right now. So we want to shrink down our grid and move that within our level wall. Alright, now let's just duplicate that light fixture by shift dragging. We'll put it on the other side of our pillar, keep up some of our symmetry here. Without intersecting our wall. And we'll rotate it 180 degrees, either in our object properties or in our tools rotate or transform. Apply. Drag it back down where we want it. And we'll take our light spot and we'll move it closer to the fixture itself. Okay.